therapist Kristen Jacobson.
Hey everyone, I'm Kristen, the anxiety therapist, and today I want to talk about why high achievers struggle with imposter syndrome and how to overcome it. So this is actually part one of a three-part series. Today I'll be talking about what imposter syndrome is, and then in part two I'll be talking about why it develops, and in part three I will be discussing how to overcome it. So if you've ever found yourself thinking, I don't belong here, maybe it's after a promotion or a new job or even hitting a personal milestone. So maybe you're training for a marathon and you feel like you don't belong with the rest of the runners. Instead of celebrating, you might worry that everyone around you will figure out that you don't really know what you're doing. And so that feeling of being fraudulent is called imposter syndrome. And I've been there too. Believe me, you're not alone. But why does this happen, especially to high achievers? Why do people with such obvious success still feel like frauds? So in this video, I'm going to explore what imposter syndrome is and why it's so important to recognize when it's happening to you. So for starters, imposter syndrome is that persistent feeling that you've somehow tricked everyone into thinking that you're actually more capable than you are. Despite evidence of your accomplishments, whether that's a degree or a successful project or a promotion, you still feel like you're not truly qualified or not as qualified as those around you. And so the core belief behind imposter syndrome is I'm a fraud and sooner or later people will figure it out. So what's really fascinating is that this phenomenon is actually most common among high achievers. We would assume that maybe it's people who are less qualified that might experience this, but it's actually the people who push themselves, strive for excellence, or find themselves in leadership roles that really tend to feel this the most. And studies suggest that about 70% of people will experience imposter syndrome at some point in their lives. And it can really hit at any stage of a career, from being a recent graduate all the way up to seasoned professionals. And so it's not about actually being underqualified or undeserving, but rather imposter syndrome is tied to how we internalize success. So when you achieve something, your mind might downplay it as luck or I was there at the right time. These are all external sources. Instead of recognizing that, hey, I have my own skills and I put in a lot of hard work, those are internal sources. And so when we attribute our success to those internal sources, that prevents imposter syndrome from developing, and we have that validation. If we're constantly attributing our success to those external sources, that's when imposter syndrome manifests. So there are 5 different phases of imposter syndrome. It's not a one size fits all. And so depending on how you experience that self-doubt, you might fall into one of the following 5 categories. So the first is the perfectionist. Perfectionism and imposter syndrome go hand in hand, right? Perfectionists have these impossibly high standards for themselves, and anything less than perfect feels like a failure. So even when they achieve great things, they tend to focus on what didn't go perfectly instead of celebrating the success. The problem with this mindset is that obviously perfection is unattainable. So when you're constantly striving for something that's unrealistic, it feeds that feeling that you're not good enough because there's always something you could have done better in your mind. So let me give you an example. Let's say you worked on a big project and it was really well received by your team or client, but then all you can think about is this minor formatting issue in one part of your presentation. So even though everyone else thinks you did an amazing job, that small mistake makes you feel like you've fallen short. Number 2 is the Superwoman or Superman. This type feels the pressure to be a star in all areas of life, not just at work, but in relationships, in personal hobbies, and even in self-care. They believe that they need to excel at everything, often taking on more than they can realistically manage. And when they can't keep up with the demands of that superhuman expectation, they feel like they're failing across the board. So an example of this is you might be excelling at work, but because you missed a few gym sessions or maybe forgot to call a friend back, you feel like you're dropping the ball. So instead of recognizing that juggling everything is tough, you feel inadequate for not being on top of it or at 100% in every area of your life. Number 3 is the natural genius. So natural geniuses believe they should excel at tasks without much effort. So when things don't come easily or they struggle with something new, it really triggers feelings of inadequacy. Maybe they grew up and they're used to being the smart one or the person who picks things up really quickly. So they interpret any difficulty as a sign that they're not actually as capable as people might think. So an example would be, imagine you're starting a new job where you need to learn some complicated software program. Instead of recognizing that everyone struggles with new skills at first and there's this learning curve, you take this as evidence that you're not as smart as you may have thought. So you may even avoid learning new things or trying new things altogether because the process of struggling makes you feel like a fraud. I have a lot of clients who will say, if I'm not good at something immediately, or if I know that I'm not going to be the best, then I don't even want to try it. So this would be an example of that at play as well. Number 4 is the soloist. So soloists believe that they need to do everything by themselves, and asking for help feels like an admission of incompetence in some way. So they end up avoiding it at all costs. But this can create unnecessary stress as they push through tasks alone that would be way easier with some assistance. So the soloist motto is, if I can't do this on my own, I must not be good enough. An example might be, you've been working on a project for days and it's not going well. You know one of your colleagues could easily jump in and help you, but instead of reaching out to them, you keep going alone, thinking that asking for help would show that you're not capable of handling it. Number 5 is the expert. And yep, this is the category I fall into. Experts think they need to know everything before they can be considered competent. So even after gaining qualifications, years of experience, or achieving success, they never feel like they know enough. The expert is constantly seeking more knowledge and skills, but never really feels qualified enough to be considered an authority in their field. So let's say you've been working in your industry for over a decade, but you still feel like you need to take just one more course or get one more certification before you can truly consider yourself an expert. You don't trust the experience you've gained because there's always more to learn. I've definitely felt this way in a lot of different areas of my life, and I'm always recognizing what I don't know in my field as opposed to reflecting on my, close to 20 years of experience in this field. So let's get into some of the science behind imposter syndrome. Why do so many of us feel this way, even when the facts clearly say otherwise? Well, it's sort of a mix of psychological factors, cognitive biases, and social influences. So cognitive biases refer to our brain's natural tendency to focus on negative experiences more than positive ones. And psychologists call this the negativity bias. It's actually a survival mechanism that evolved to help us avoid danger. But while this bias was useful for our ancestors, who maybe had to remember which berries were poisonous, it's not as helpful when we're assessing our own success. Instead of focusing on your wins, your brain sort of zeroes in on the mistakes, fueling that feeling that you're not really good enough. There's also comparison bias. So have you ever scrolled through social media and felt like everyone else is just crushing it while you're simply getting by? That's the comparison bias at work. So we tend to compare our struggles with other people's highlight reels. So you're essentially comparing their best moments to your hardest challenges, which leads to really an unfair, distorted view of yourself. And then number 3 is perfectionism. A lot of high achievers grew up in environments where success was highly valued, whether that was in school, sports, within families. So when you were praised for being smart or talented, it sort of set up an expectation that you must always live up to those labels. And if you hit a roadblock or you struggle with a task or you fail, it might feel like a sign that you've somehow lost your edge. And again, this fuels feelings of inadequacy. So imposter syndrome isn't just about feeling a little unsure of yourself, Over time, it can really take a serious toll on your mental health, your relationships, and your professional success. And people who struggle with imposter syndrome are more likely to suffer from anxiety, depression, and especially burnout. The constant feeling of inadequacy leads to overworking, fear of failure, and reluctance to take on new challenges because of this fear of being found out or exposed as a fraud. It also affects relationships. People who struggle with imposter syndrome often downplay their achievements. They might reject compliments or avoid seeking help. And this can really distance them from colleagues, friends, loved ones, etc., as they put up walls to avoid being exposed. They also fear talking about their imposter syndrome because they feel like they're the only ones who experience it, therefore reinforcing those fraudulent feelings and isolation. But as I mentioned before, roughly 70% of the population experience this. So it's really a widespread, common thing. Professionally, it's a double-edged sword, right? While the drive to prove oneself can lead to that high achievement, it can also lead to overcompensation, where we're working long hours, taking on too much responsibility, or avoiding new opportunities out of that fear of failure. And so this can really create a cycle of burnout and self-doubt, even in the most capable people. So imposter syndrome is not a diagnosis. It's more of a pattern, and it's more common than we think. It's not limited to people just starting their careers, and it really affects high achievers and professionals at all stages. So recognizing it in yourself is really the first step in dealing with it, and understanding how it manifests in different ways can really help you catch those feelings of self-doubt before they spiral. So in the next part of this series, we'll dive into the origins of imposter syndrome and explore how early experiences and environments really shape these feelings. So stick around. You might be surprised at what's really driving your imposter feelings.